During the winter of 1997, air traffic control near Reykjavík detected an aircraft entering restricted airspace from somewhere deep above the North Atlantic. At first, nobody considered it unusual. Storms often forced planes to change course unexpectedly. But within minutes, the situation became impossible to explain. The aircraft had no transponder signal, no registered flight number, no communication, and according to radar data, it was flying far too high for a normal passenger plane. Air traffic controller Marcus Jensen stared silently at the radar screen while static crackled softly through his headset. "What airline is that?" Nobody answered. Another controller leaned closer. "There's no registration." Marcus grabbed the radio immediately. "Unknown aircraft entering Icelandic airspace. Identify yourself immediately." Only static replied. The plane continued moving slowly across the radar. Perfectly steady. Almost too steady. Then something even stranger happened. The aircraft suddenly disappeared from radar completely. Gone. Controllers exchanged nervous looks. Before anyone could react, every radio frequency inside the tower filled with a loud metallic sound, like thousands of voices speaking at once. Several systems shut down instantly. Lights flickered across the control room. Then, the plane returned to radar. Closer now. Much closer. Impossible closer. One controller's face went pale. It crossed nearly 80 kilometers in less than 10 seconds. Marcus stared silently. That's not possible. The storm outside intensified violently. Snow slammed against the tower windows while alarms began flashing across multiple screens. Then the emergency phone rang. Marcus answered immediately. A military officer spoke urgently from the other side. "Do not allow that aircraft to land." Marcus frowned. "It already entered our airspace." "We know." "What is it?" Silence followed. Then the officer whispered, "We lost that plane in 1968. Cold chills spread through the control tower. Marcus slowly looked back toward the radar screen. The aircraft's identification finally appeared for the first time. Flight 914. One of the older controllers stepped backward instantly. "No." Marcus looked toward him. "You know this flight." The older man's hands shook slightly. "My father investigated its disappearance." Silence filled the room. The man stared at the radar screen in horror. Every passenger vanished over the Atlantic nearly 30 years ago. Then, the tower windows trembled violently. A massive shadow passed slowly above the building. The aircraft had arrived. Across the runway as the aircraft descended through the storm clouds above Reykjavík. Every person inside the control tower watched silently. The plane looked old. Far older than any aircraft still flying in 1997. Its metal body appeared darkened by age, almost burned in places. Ice covered large sections of the wings despite the engines still operating normally. But the strangest part was the silence. No engine roar. No vibration. The aircraft moved across the sky almost soundlessly. Marcus grabbed the radio again. "Flight 914, identify yourselves immediately." Static answered. Then, a voice finally came through. Distorted. Weak. "This is Flight 914 requesting permission to land." Several controllers froze instantly. The voice sounded ancient, like an old recording damaged over time. Marcus swallowed nervously. "Flight 914, state your departure airport." A pause followed. Then, New York. The older controller beside Marcus looked horrified. That flight disappeared in 1968. The aircraft touched the runway smoothly. No sparks. No noise. Only silence as it rolled slowly across the snow-covered tarmac before stopping far from the terminal. Then everything inside the control tower went dark. Every screen shut off simultaneously. Emergency backup lights activated seconds later, bathing the room in deep red light. One controller whispered softly, "What if it never disappeared?" Nobody answered. Military vehicles arrived moments later, surrounding the aircraft from a distance. Orders flooded through the radios. Nobody was allowed near the plane. Nobody was allowed to board it. Yet something about the aircraft itself felt wrong. The windows were dark. Too dark. No movement inside. No silhouettes. Nothing. Then suddenly, a light turned on inside the cockpit. A figure stood behind the glass. Watching the runway, Marcus leaned closer toward the window. The pilot looked completely still. Motionless. Then the cockpit radio activated automatically. The same distorted voice returned. "Why are you waiting?" Marcus grabbed the microphone carefully. How many passengers are on board? Silence. Then all of them. The transmission cut instantly. At that exact moment, every aircraft light turned on simultaneously. Dozens of windows illuminated across the plane. And inside every seat, people were visible. Passengers. Perfectly still. Not moving. Not blinking. Just sitting silently in darkness. Watching the runway. The military commander on site immediately ordered everyone to stay back. But one young officer ignored the command. He approached the aircraft staircase alone. The moment he reached the door, the plane lights shut off again. Darkness swallowed everything. Then the aircraft door slowly opened by itself. And from somewhere inside the cabin came the sound of passengers whispering all at once. The whispering from inside Flight 914 grew louder. Hundreds of voices speaking softly at the same time. Impossible to understand. The young military officer standing near the aircraft door froze completely. Snow blew violently across the runway beneath flashing emergency lights. Then, the officer stepped inside the plane. The door slowly closed behind him. Silence returned instantly. Everyone inside the control tower watched nervously through binoculars and cameras. Minutes passed. No communication. No movement. Then the officer's radio crackled suddenly. Heavy breathing filled the speaker, followed by a whisper, "They're all alive." Static interrupted the transmission violently. Marcus grabbed the microphone immediately. "Report your status." The radio screamed with distorted noise. Then the officer spoke again. Terrified now. "They haven't aged." Cold fear spread across the tower. The older controller beside Marcus looked pale. "That's impossible." Then, another voice spoke through the radio. Not the officer. A calm female voice. "We never landed." The connection died instantly. Suddenly, the aircraft engines activated. Without warning. Without sound. The plane lights flickered violently while the runway itself began shaking beneath the storm. Military vehicles backed away immediately. Inside the cockpit, the pilot still stood motionless behind the glass, watching. Then every passenger inside the windows slowly turned their heads toward the control tower at the exact same moment. Marcus stepped backward instinctively. "What are they?" The aircraft door suddenly reopened. The young officer emerged slowly from inside. But something about him looked wrong. His movements were stiff, unnatural, his skin pale gray beneath the runway lights. The military commander shouted toward him, "Get away from the aircraft." The officer ignored him. Instead, he stared directly toward the tower, smiling faintly. Then he spoke into the radio one final time. "They don't know they're dead." The runway lights exploded instantly. Darkness swallowed the airport. And within that darkness, the plane disappeared. Gone completely. No sound. No movement. Nothing. When emergency power finally returned minutes later, the runway stood empty beneath falling snow. No aircraft. No passengers. No officer. Only one thing remained behind. Fresh footprints in the snow leading away from the runway. Hundreds of them. Days later, investigators searched every radar recording from that night. Most files had been corrupted beyond recovery, except for one final transmission recorded moments before the disappearance. The cockpit camera briefly activated during the storm. The footage showed the inside of Flight 914. Every passenger sat motionless in complete silence. Pale, frozen, dead, and standing in the center aisle was the young military officer, smiling directly into the camera while whispering softly, "We are still arriving." Then the recording ended, and somewhere above the freezing sky,